hey there, Marie Greene from Olive Knits here. And for today's Knitting Rescue 911, we are going to talk about how to add a lifeline to your knitting. Now, first things first, what is a lifeline? A lifeline gives you a reboot point in your knitting, and it's something that you'll often use before you start on a part of the pattern where you might be a little worried about getting something wrong. Maybe it's a new technique you haven't tried before, and you just want to make sure that if something doesn't go the way you expect, you can easily reset back to that point before you started that new thing and give it another try pretty easily. Because when you have to back up your stitches, it takes a lot of time to pick them out one by one and go back multiple rows to get back to the point that you want to restart something. Now, it's faster to frog, where you just pull the yarn and just rip it all the way back, but it can also be a little riskier, and sometimes it's hard to figure out where you went back to and how to make sure you're starting back at the right point. A lifeline solves that for you. By adding a lifeline, you can note in the pattern which row you are on so that if you do need to go back to that point, you know exactly where you were in the pattern. You can just pull the yarn all the way out to that point. Makes it super simple. All right, so to create a lifeline, you'll need a yarn needle and you'll need some lightweight yarn in a contrasting color. It's helpful if it looks different than the yarn you're using for your project. Now, what you'll want to do is mark in the pattern where you're adding the lifeline so you can remember if you do have to use it, you know exactly where you put it in the pattern. So let's say this is row 48 of the pattern. I mark it on my pattern. I take my yarn needle and I am going to run it through from right to left all the way through the stitches on my needle. And you can kind of pull it through a little bit as you go, depending on how many stitches you have, and depending on how complex the pattern is. This could take a little bit longer because you'll have to make sure that you're adjusting as the pattern adjusts on your needle. So if there's some cables, you might have to work with those, but you're just going through one stitch at a time, right in order, from the right side aimed left. And I am just drawing this extra yarn through. And this yarn is going to stay there as I continue on. That's why it's helpful to keep it nice and thin, because you're going to work these stitches and you don't want this extra yarn to create any difference in the gauge there. So thinnest yarn possible works really well. And also you can even use something like dental floss. So all right, we're just going to keep going because we want to make sure we have every single stitch accounted for. That's really important because if you do have to pull back later, you don't want any stitches left out. No stitches left behind, because if you do, that stitch could be a sad, sad victim to frogging. All right, we are just going to keep going. We're almost there, getting this lifeline in, almost to the end. If you're knitting in the round, you'll just make sure you get through all the way to the last stitch, pull that through. Now I no longer need that yarn needle, and I am just going to, all right, so disregard the tails there, but we have a lifeline. Our lifeline is in place, and now we can move forward in the project and know if we get stuck, we can take the yarn and pull all the way back, and it will stop at this point naturally. It will not go further than this because this lifeline is keeping those stitches safe, and it will prevent us from losing any extra rows that we don't want to lose. So we leave this in until we're past the point of worry. It can stay in until you're finished with the project and then just pull it out once you know you don't need it. But it's basically insurance. It's just an opportunity to know that if something goes wrong, you can pull the yarn out back to that point, reset, and get back to it and start again. And you'll just pull this out and keep going. Now, if you do have to frog all the way back to your lifeline, then you wouldn't have the needle on there. And I just want to show you what that looks like. So see right now, if we were to have a bunch more knitting here and then we had to pull it out, go back to our lifeline, see how this thread is holding on to our stitches for us. So it wouldn't pull anything. Here's the tail. It's not going to pull anything past that point. That's how it keeps us safe. Once you get back to that point, then you'll just put the stitches back on your needle the same way. And I have a video here in Knitting Rescue 911 that talks about how to get those stitches back on your needle if you need that one. And then you can get it back on your needle and then keep going. You can either keep that lifeline in if you feel like you might need it again, or you can go ahead and remove it and then continue on with your knitting. If you love learning knitting tips and tricks, make sure to like and follow me here on YouTube so you'll be the first to know when new videos are available.